Montana Territory, 1882. The first time Weston Ellery saw Delaney North. She was holding a rifle like it weighed nothing, standing on the porch of a burned-out cabin with a busted lip and blood on her sleeve. "You step 1 inch closer, cowboy, and I will blow a hole clean through your hat." Weston stopped his horse. The sun was setting behind her, lighting her hair like wildfire. She was barefoot, her dress torn, but her eyes didn't flinch. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said, raising both hands. "Your barn's on fire." "I know," she snapped. "I lit it." That made him blink. His gelding shifted beneath him, sensing the tension. "There's 2 men inside," she added. "They came last night, tried to take what wasn't theirs." Weston didn't ask for details. He saw enough in the way she stood steadied but shaking deep down. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands high. "You got any water?" Delaney eyed him. "You law?" "No, just passing through. Name's Weston Ellery." She looked him over. "You got a gun?" "Rifle in the saddlebag." "Then help me drag their bodies out before the flames reach the woods." He did, quietly. The heat licked at his boots while they worked, the air thick with smoke and blood. The 2 men were strangers Weston had seen once in Miles City, loud-mouthed drifters looking for easy prey. They picked the wrong woman. By the time the fire burned down and the moon rose, Delaney had collapsed on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. "You got anyone left?" Weston asked. "No. Husband died last winter." Her voice had gone flat. "Children gone before that. Fever took my boy. My girl was taken." Weston sat beside her, not too close. "Taken? By the same kind of men who came last night." She flinched as she said it, like speaking the words opened an old wound. Her face was dirt-smudged, her lip cracked, and her arms bore the marks of healed over burns and old knife wounds. She noticed him looking. "You stare at my scars," she said bitterly. "I will take your eyes." "I ain't staring," Weston said. "Just seeing." She shot him a look. "Same thing." "No," he said gently. "It ain't." She looked away, jaw tight. "I got a place," he said after a while. "South of here. About 2 days' ride. My brother left it to me. You can rest there. Safe. I do not need your charity." "Ain't charity. You need time. You just lost your home." Delaney hesitated. She was proud, but she was also exhausted. And alone. "I do not ride with strangers," she said. "Then I will walk beside you," he said, "until I am not one." She looked at him for a long time. He did not move, did not press, just waited. Finally, she stood. "I will leave in the morning. You stay out here tonight." "Fair enough." He nodded and pulled his bedroll from his horse, setting it out under the stars. She watched him for a moment longer before disappearing inside the half-burned house. By midday the next day, they rode together in silence. She had no horse of her own, so Weston let her ride his and walked beside it, leading them along the narrow trail through the tall pines. She watched him. He never once complained. That night they made camp near a stream. Delaney built the fire while Weston caught a pair of rabbits. When they ate, she did not speak much, but she watched him in the firelight, her eyes softer than before. "You do not ask questions," she said. "I figure you'll tell me what you want me to know." She was quiet. Then, "My daughter's name was Nora." Weston paused. "Was? They took her. I do not know if she still lives." He nodded slowly, the fire crackling between them. "If she does, we will find her." Delaney blinked, startled. "Why would you do that?" "Because no child should be lost, and no mother should carry that alone." She looked down, hiding her face behind her hair. He did not pry further. By the 3rd day, they reached Weston's ranch. It was not much, just a small cabin near the river, a barn, and a few fenced acres, but it was clean and quiet. Safe. Delaney walked slowly to the porch, running her hand along the railing. You keep it tidy. Helps me think. He gave her the room inside and took the barn for himself. She did not argue. As the days passed, Delaney stayed. She fixed the broken door hinge, gathered berries, and even helped Weston mend the fence. She never spoke of her past unless it slipped out in pieces, like the story about the scar on her side, a blade from a man who smiled while he cut her, or the burn on her forearm from shielding her son when fever made him thrash against the firewood rack. Weston never asked. He just listened when she talked and worked beside her when she did not. One evening, as the wind turned cold, she came out onto the porch while he was sharpening his knife. You do not flinch, she said quietly. Most men would. I do not see a reason to. I am covered in marks. I see a woman who lived through hell and came out swinging. She looked down. Her hands trembled. He stood and stepped closer. You do not have to hide them here. Delaney shook her head. I have spent years hiding. I do not know how to stop. Then let me help you remember. She looked up at him. For the first time, she did not look away. He reached up and gently brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. You are safe here. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Instead, she stood tall, lifted her chin and said, Then I will stay. And Weston smiled, not the kind that asked for anything, but the kind that said he meant every word. The wind sharpened in the weeks that followed, carrying the edge of the coming winter through the cottonwoods along the river. Weston stacked cut wood beneath the eaves while Delaney sorted through the cellar, preserving what she could: salt pork, dried apples, jars of wild plum jam she'd made herself. They'd settled into a rhythm, unspoken but steady, like two mules pulling the same plow. Late one afternoon, Weston returned from checking the snares near the ridge and found her in the lean-to behind the barn, hammering an iron hinge back into shape across a flat stone. Her sleeves were rolled, and her hands were black with soot. The steady clang of iron rang out between them, defiant and sure. You ever do smithing before? He asked, setting down the rabbits he'd caught. She didn't stop swinging. My father was a blacksmith. Taught me enough to keep a wagon from falling apart. Weston watched her a moment. You swing like you've done it all your life. I swing like a woman who never got to stop. That quieted him. He crouched near the rabbits and began skinning in silence while the iron cooled at her feet. When she finally set the hammer down, she sat beside him without ceremony, brushing dirt from her skirt. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. Did you ever lose someone who didn't come back? Weston didn't look up. He kept his hands moving, careful and clean. My brother. Spring of '79. He was caught in a rockslide near Helena. I dug him out with my own hands. Took me 3 days to find his body. Delaney didn't speak for a long time. Then, I stopped believing I was allowed to grieve. Like I'd used up all my sorrow and there wasn't any left. You don't run out, Weston said. It just changes weight. She looked at him then, not startled, just seeing him in a closer way. I buried my son with a wooden spoon, she said. Ground was too frozen for a shovel. My husband was coughing blood in the corner. Couldn't move. I wrapped the boy in my shawl and dug until my knuckles split. Weston didn't offer comfort. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small square of linen. He handed it to her without a word. She pressed it to her palm where a scab had broken open and let the silence settle like dust after a long ride. That night, she stepped inside the barn while he was brushing down the horse. Her lantern cast a faint gold glow across the hay-strewn floor. You know how to dance? She asked. He looked up, surprised. Suppose I do. She set the lantern on a beam and held out her hand, not smiling, just waiting. They moved slow, socked feet sliding over the uneven boards, his hand at her back, hers resting lightly on his shoulder. No music, just the sound of the wind outside and the creak of wood beneath them. I don't remember the last time I touched someone without bracing first, she said. You don't have to brace around me. I'm learning that. They danced until the lantern burned low, then she pulled away gently. I'm not yours yet, Weston. I know, but I don't want to leave. You don't have to. She nodded once, then stepped outside, and he stood alone beneath the rafters, watching the door swing softly in her wake. In the days that followed, Delaney took over the smokehouse, cured meat with practiced hands, and taught Weston how to sew a patch that wouldn't tear under saddle strain. He taught her how to use a lariat, how to read the slope of the land for signs of rising water. One early morning, Weston returned from the creek trail with a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table while she stirred cornmeal over the fire. Found something, he said. She opened it slowly. Inside was a faded wool dress, small, with a patch of embroidery around the collar, 2 violets stitched in dark blue thread. Delaney's breath caught. This was Nora's. I found it snagged in a cedar branch by the creek bend, Weston said. Far side of the ridge. She ran her fingers over the stitching. It was in the saddlebag the night she was taken. Weston waited. She liked violets because they were small and didn't ask for attention. He crouched beside her. We'll start looking in earnest come spring. When the snow lifts. She turned toward him, her face unreadable, and after a long moment, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. Don't promise what you can't keep. I'm not. She stayed there, close enough to feel his breath, and something in her posture shifted. Not surrender, not need, just trust, quiet and full. I want to believe you, she whispered. Then let me give you reason. And for the first time in years, she let someone hold her, not to protect, not to steady, but only because it felt like a place to rest. The first snow came early that year, falling quiet and thick over the valley, while the last of the geese lifted from the river and vanished south. Weston stood outside the barn, watching the flakes settle on the rail before brushing them away with the side of his hand. Delaney stepped out from the house with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her boots crunching the fresh layer beneath her. Ground's too wet to cut more fence posts, she said, glancing toward the pasture. We'll let the horses roam the near field for now, Weston replied. They won't wander far. Not with the creek iced. Delaney nodded once, then turned back toward the cabin. The hem of her skirt was damp, but she didn't seem to notice. Weston followed her inside, closing the door against the cold. She had a map spread across the table, corners pinned with 2 river stones and the base of a lantern. Thin lines marked old trade routes and surveyor trails. She pointed to a spot west of the Milk River. Trader there once told me some children were taken north, sold or handed off to a mining camp past Fort Benton. If we want to look come spring, that's where we start. Weston leaned over the map, tracing the path with his finger. That's distant country. You sure about it? No, she said, but I've learned to follow even the smallest thread. He straightened. Then we'll go together. Delaney folded the map with care, sliding it into a leather pouch she'd stitched herself. You always agree so easy? I've never had a reason not to. She gave him a long look. You don't know what's waiting out there. I know what's waiting here if I don't help. She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on him longer than they used to, like she was still trying to measure the shape of his steadiness. That night, as wind swept across the roof and the fire burned low, Delaney sat on the floor near the hearth patching a wool shirt Weston had torn on a low branch. Her fingers moved with patient certainty. Weston sat on the stool nearby, oiling his saddle straps. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked, not looking up. Used to, he said. Before it became something worth coming home to. Her needle paused. I never thought I'd be anywhere long enough to miss it. Maybe you just hadn't found the right place. I think places are only right because of who's in them. Weston didn't reply. He just watched her hands as they worked the needle through the cloth. Her sleeves had slipped back, revealing the pale ridges of old burns along her wrist, not new to him anymore, but still seen. She didn't pull her sleeves down. I stopped minding if you saw, she said without lifting her head. I know. I thought I'd always have to carry them like a warning. They're not warnings. They're proof. She tied off the thread and set the shirt aside, then looked at him fully. In the firelight, her face had softened, not in defeat, but in peace. I didn't think I'd ever feel ordinary again, she said quietly. You're not ordinary, Delaney. Her eyes held his steady and sure. But I'm not broken either. No, he said. You were never broken, just forced to bend too far for too long. She stood then, slow and deliberate, and crossed the space between them. Her hand touched his chest, resting over the fabric of his shirt. You've seen all of it, she said. Every part of me I tried to bury, and I never turned away. No, she whispered. You stayed. Weston lifted his hand and curled his fingers around hers. I always will. Outside, the wind kept on, brushing against the cabin like an old memory. Inside, the silence between them settled into something whole. She leaned up and kissed him, not rushed or desperate, but certain, like coming home. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. I want a life here, she said. With you. Then we'll build it, Weston said, board by board. And she believed him, because he already had. The thaw came slow that year. Snow sagged off the rooftops in heavy folds, and the river cracked open in loud, sudden bursts. Weston stood at the edge of the field, watching the frost retreat from the soil like a wound healing in reverse. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Delaney stepped out, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a coil of rope slung over her shoulder. You never said you had a milk cow, she said, eyeing the far pen. I didn't, Weston replied. She wandered in from the northwood last week. No brand. Figured she took off from someone in the freeze. She's heavy with calf. I guessed as much. You want to name her? Delaney tilted her head, considering. Etta. She looks like she's tired of nonsense. Weston chuckled and moved toward the pen. We'll build her a better shelter before the next storm. I don't trust this melt to last. Delaney followed. If you hold her steady, I'll check her feet. She's favoring the back right. As Weston steadied the cow's halter, Delaney crouched low, fingers tracing the hoof with practiced care. I used to do this every spring, she said. Back when the world still had order. Before everything broke. You miss it. I miss what I thought it would become. Weston didn't speak. She stood and met his eyes. But I don't think I'd trade now for then. Not anymore. Later that week, Weston returned from town with a parcel wrapped in oilskin. He set it on the table without comment while Delaney was cutting dried apples into a pot of boiling water. What's that? She asked, hands still moving. Something for you. She dried her palms and unwrapped it. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, the kind stitched by hand, with a strip of rawhide to tie it shut. She ran her hand over the cover. You think I write? I think you carry things too long in silence. Delaney looked down at the blank pages. Paper's expensive. So is peace. Doesn't mean it's not worth the cost. She opened it to the first page, the crease stiff. I wouldn't know where to start. Wherever it hurts the least. That night, she wrote by the firelight, slow and careful, while Weston mended a cracked stirrup in the next room. She didn't read aloud, and he didn't ask her to. The following morning, as they packed provisions into saddlebags, Weston moved with purpose. "We'll leave before sunup," he said. "Follow the ridge trail west. Take the long route. Safer that way." Delaney tightened the buckles on her pack. "I spoke to Old Man Dilly last time we rode through. He said there's a Cree woman near the Milk River who trades for information. Calls herself Magda. She remembers children. You trust her." "I trust that she remembers what others forget." They rode out at first light, the cabin tucked behind them like a chapter they no longer needed to rewrite. The horizon stretched wide, the ground still damp but firm beneath the hooves. Delaney rode with her back straight, her face turned toward the hills. At camp that night, Weston handed her a cup of coffee, thick and black, and sat beside her near the fire. "You ever think about what you'd say to her?" he asked. "If we find her." Delaney set the cup down. "I used to rehearse it, every night. But now, I think I'd just hold her. Let her speak first." Weston nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Maybe that's all she'll need." Delaney reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the journal. She opened it to a page she hadn't shown him. "She used to draw birds," she said. "Little ones, always in pairs." Weston leaned closer. The page held a rough sketch, 2 violet-crowned hummingbirds, wings half lifted. "She said they mate for life. Then we'll find her, and bring her home." Delaney looked at him, her face unreadable in the firelight. "And if she's not there? Then we keep looking." She studied him a long time, then closed the journal and set it aside. "You're not afraid of what we might find," she said. "No, why?" "Because I stopped fearing anything that brings you closer to peace." She didn't reply. Instead, she leaned into his shoulder, quiet and sure, and stayed there until the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead in silence. The trail narrowed as they neared the Milk River's bend, where the land turned to gray shale and the sky opened wide beyond the cottonwoods. Delaney rode ahead, her coat collar turned up against the wind, eyes sweeping the ridgeline. Weston followed close, leading the pack mule. The morning had been quiet, save for the distant call of a hawk and the crunch of hooves over thawed ground. They reached the edge of a low bluff by mid-afternoon. Below, a scattering of canvas shelters leaned into the wind, ringed by smoke curls and slow movement. A thin line of horses stood tethered near the brush, heads low. "That her camp?" Weston asked, dismounting. Delaney nodded. "The trader said she wears a white shell necklace and doesn't speak English unless she wants to." She paused. "Let me go first." He didn't argue. Delaney walked down the slope with purpose, her boots leaving clean prints in the damp soil. When she reached the camp's edge, a woman stepped from behind a weathered hide screen. Her hair was streaked with iron gray, her braids long, and a string of white shells hung down over her chest. Her eyes, dark and steady, met Delaney's without hesitation. Delaney lowered her hood and held her hands open, palms empty. "I'm looking for a child," she said. The woman tipped her head slightly, listening. Her name was Nora North. She would be about 10 now. Taken 4 winters ago, east of Fort Shaw. The woman didn't speak right away. Then she turned and gestured toward a kettle hanging above a low fire. Delaney followed her to it, kneeling beside the warmth. Weston remained at the ridge watching. After a long silence, the woman reached into a satchel and pulled out a bundle of cloth. From it, she unfolded a small beaded bag, pale blue with a faded violet stitched in the center. Delaney's breath stopped. "She came through," the woman said, her voice low and accented but clear. "Traders took her north, sold her to a family near Fort Assiniboine. Metis couple. No children of their own. They call her Enner now." Delaney's fingers closed around the pouch. "Is she safe?" They treat her kindly. She is not the same child you lost. But she is not lost anymore. Delaney nodded. Her voice caught in her throat. Do you know where they are now? Near the Poplar River, south of the trees that stand in fours. She plays fiddle. Laughs easily. Delaney closed her eyes, holding the image like something sacred. When she stood again, the woman pressed a flat carved stone into her palm. When you find her, do not try to erase what she has become. Only love what remains. Delaney swallowed hard. I will. As she climbed back up the bluff, Weston met her halfway. Her face was pale but calm, the pouch clutched tightly in her hand. She's alive, Delaney said. Living with a good family. They've changed her name, but not her spirit. Weston touched her back, steadying her. You want to go to her? She nodded. But not to take her, just to see, to let her choose. They rode on for 3 more days, crossing into lands thick with cottonwood groves and soft reeds. At sunset on the 4th day, they came upon a cabin nestled beneath 4 leaning pines. Smoke rose from the chimney, and somewhere inside, a fiddle played a slow, wandering tune. Delaney dismounted and walked to the porch alone. Weston waited by the gate, hat in hand. The door opened before she knocked. A man with dark hair and a weathered face stepped out, a woman behind him. And between them, a girl with dark curls and a quiet smile. Delaney stood still, heart pounding. The girl looked at her, curious but unafraid. Are you the woman from the locket? Delaney's breath caught. You kept it. The girl nodded. Sometimes I dream you're standing by the river. I've been looking for you, Delaney said softly. But not to take you, just to see you smile again. The girl stepped forward and reached out, her fingers brushing Delaney's. I remember your voice. Delaney didn't cry. She just knelt and held her daughter's hands, and the world softened around them. That night, Weston stayed near the barn while Delaney sat by the fire inside the cabin, listening to her daughter play. They spoke little, but that didn't matter. What needed saying existed in the space between their hands, in the way Nora leaned against her without hesitation. They stayed 4 days. On the 5th morning, Delaney stood by the gate, her arms around Nora one last time. You have everything you need? She asked. Nora nodded. I do now. Delaney kissed her forehead. Then I'll come when you want me and never before. Nora smiled. I know. As Weston and Delaney rode south again, the air grew warmer, the land greener. They moved without hurry. There was no longer a storm behind them or a hunt ahead. On the 3rd evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Weston pulled his horse alongside hers. You still see the world in pieces? He asked. Delaney looked at him, the wind lifting her hair. No, I see it as something I can hold now. You think you'll stay with me? He asked, quiet but sure. I already have, she said. I just hadn't said it out loud. He reached for her hand, and she gave it freely, their fingers laced as the road stretched on. They returned to the cabin before the first spring bloom, the valley alive with thaw and birdsong. Delaney planted violets by the porch, while Weston repaired the roof. A month later, a letter arrived from the north. It was written in a child's careful hand and closed with a drawing of 2 birds, wings touching. Delaney hung it above the hearth. That summer, Weston built a bench beneath the cottonwood tree, and Delaney read aloud from the pages she'd filled. Some nights, they danced barefoot in the grass beyond the barn. Others, they sat in silence, her head on his shoulder, watching the stars turn. They never needed more than that. They had each other, the land, the peace they'd earned. And they were home,